Welcome to this InfoSecurity Europe podcast.
My name is Shiri Ivetsan. I am the Director of Product Management at Whitesource. And at Whitesource, we are focused on managing the open source code for all types of companies, from small startups to large enterprise, Fortune 500. And what we do with regards to managing open source, what it actually means is, first of all, for the companies to actually know what kind of open source they are using. So it's sort of like arbitrary, each developer brings their own open source code and it's sort of a mess. So first of all is to generate the bill of material, right? To understand what you're using. Second is the security threat, which is very strong right now. So, this more and more vulnerabilities are being disclosed, malicious packages, which we'll probably discuss in one of the next questions. So detecting those, and not only detecting, but also prioritizing and understanding how to remediate them. And the last thing is the legal part of it. So many people think that because it's open source, you can just use it, you can sell it, you can modify it. And that's not how it is. And there are various legal restrictions with regards to open source. And this is the last thing that we deal with. So this is regarding SCA, and now we're in a very exciting time where we're more towards, managing the entire application security for our customers and coming to new markets like supply chain security, infrastructure as code, etc. So definitely interesting times for us. So I think there are various threats that businesses right now have. So we touched part of them, right? So, open source is great, right? It's very beneficial for many companies, and I think it's like the biggest revolution that we had in the last 10 years or so in the software industry. But there are also threats, right? So whether if it's with regards to vulnerabilities, just, the people who write the open source don't have the right security training, so they don't know how to write secure code. Not like, the people in our companies, supposedly, who have security training. So this is one threat. The other one is malicious packages, or like the supply chain part of that, right? So hackers that are understanding how popular open source is, and they are trying to hack it for whatever it is, Bitcoin mining, just proving that they can, for getting data or private information. So I think if we look at that, these are the biggest threats. And I think that not only those are the biggest threats, it things that the industry didn't crack yet, how to solve those. So it's pretty easy for us to understand, right? We need to remediate all the vulnerabilities. We don't need to have any malicious packages in our repositories, but it's actually easier said than done. In an average application, there are like thousands of open source vulnerabilities, just an average, application that an organization would use. And it's not only about, I cannot, of course, remediate and upgrade the versions for all those thousands libraries. I need to prioritize. I need to understand what I should tackle first. So I think that this prioritization and remediation part is something that we definitely need to think about when, dealing with application security in general, with SCA in particular. So I think companies can actually do a lot to prevent these threats. And when we speak about prevention, we usually speak about shifting left, right? Detecting the vulnerabilities or the license issues as early as we can in the life cycle, making sure that, we prevent them. They are not even part of our code. They are not even part of, what we put into GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, right? Maybe they're not even part of the code in the developer's IDE. So if we speak about open source, for example, it's pretty easy to do it today. The first step that a developer does before actually adding a new open source component is a research. And the research today is mostly functional, right? Whether or not this open source component can do what I need it to do. And what we try to, educate or bring to the table is more than just this functional thing, but also in a matter of what is the quality of that open source component? What is the adoption, right? Is it really adopted? How well is it maintained? How many vulnerabilities does it have? How many malicious takeovers there were in the last 1 year or 2 years? So these are a lot of things that we can do, and as developers, as security people, we can do even before we actually add this open source library into the code, thus preventing a lot of the risks. Another thing that we can do, and I know that we in Whitesource speak quite a lot about that, is upgrading the open source components. So in terms of statistics, it's actually pretty good, because around 85, I think this is the last number that we got, 85% of the open source vulnerabilities are actually already fixed in a later version of the open source. So that means that if I keep my versions of my open source components always up to date, right? I make sure to upgrade it all the time. I actually prevent 85% of the vulnerabilities. I didn't have to do anything in particular. Maybe I'm not even aware that there was a vulnerability. But by just keeping up to date, we prevent around 85% of the vulnerabilities. So this is another very good way to prevent. And then the 15% that we didn't prevent, we can prioritize and understand what should be the mitigation. So these are the two things I think that come to my mind when I hear like prevention. So InfoSecurity Europe is actually, I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to meet, to come together, to network, to actually, I usually enjoy these types of conferences because I think it's a great opportunity to understand, what are the biggest threats, what are the biggest opportunities that we all have, as the security market for security professionals. At the end of the day, we actually understand that we all have sort of the same challenges, even if we are in different types of maturity in our companies. And this is, by the way, is the same for security companies like us, right? We have to deal with the same things that our customers deal with. So this is why it's specifically really good for me to hear from, other professionals, how they see the threats and the opportunities around the market, to share ideas, hear some stuff around the innovation in this market, because it always gives me sort of new ideas when I hear it in conferences.
Thank you for listening to this InfoSecurity Europe podcast.